everyone. Welcome back to Killer Cure. I'm Todd Perman, as always, joined by Bill Liao, who's my co-host. Today, we're joined by Henry Dimbleby, who has been at the center of the global conversation around food, health, and prevention. From leading UK's national food strategy to building businesses in the food space, Henry has spent years looking at how we eat, what we eat, how it impacts our long-term health benefits. As somebody that just got back from Italy and ate anything under the sun I could get my hands on, this is a very relevant topic and a very relevant conversation because food in the US and in many places is just terrible and contributing to a lot of the health issues we talk about on this show every day. At Seed, we're very focused on prevention, but food is the beginning of that prevention. If we get to it later in the show, we talk about like my metrics after I got back from Italy were better than the 2 weeks, and I ate everything. I ate and drank everything I could. So anyway, Henry, I'd love for you to take a minute and introduce yourself, maybe a bit about your background, and give you an opportunity to talk about what you do and what's meaningful for you. And then we'll get to a bunch of questions and see how the conversation goes. It can go anywhere. With Bill on the phone, it's up for grabs. So, Henry?
Well, great to meet you, Todd. And I'm glad you started with pleasure because food, above all, we can be very, very serious about it. And it is pretty serious. It's one of the greatest long-term determinants of our longevity and healthful longevity and vitality. But it should also be about pleasure and joy. I started my life, I studied physics and philosophy, and then I started life as a chef in a Michelin star restaurant, learned how to cook, went from there to being a journalist, then thought I'd better learn a bit about business, so then became a consultant, and then with my friend John Vincent, realized that what I really loved was food, and we set up a restaurant chain called Leon that John has just brought back. And that was a very selfish endeavor. We'd been working together, we'd been on the road, and basically food on the go, fast food in the UK at this time, and this was back in 2002, 2003. It was either absolutely delicious Kentucky Fried Chicken that then after you'd eaten it, you felt sleepy and guilty and depressed, and then you fell asleep and then you woke up fat. Or it was kind of neon lit, very cold sandwiches. And we were like, why can't fast food be good food? There's nothing in the words fast or food that means it has to be so terrible. Turns out it's pretty tricky to do. We took that chain from one little restaurant in Carnaby Street, which, funny enough, won in our first year, we won the best new restaurant in the UK. It was a tiny box, 1,000 square foot, and the restaurant that had won it the year before was the Wolsey, which was this huge, very grand restaurant on Piccadilly. And we took that to a £100 million business and sold it. John has just bought it back, actually, my business partner, and is going again with it. So through that process, through Leon, really, and trying to do fast food that tastes good and does you good, that sucked me in to the food system in all sorts of different ways. So people thought we were organic because of the way we spoke. I set up a co-founded a thing called the Sustainable Restaurant Association to help people. It's a nightmare running a restaurant, a lot of moving parts. So doing sustainability as well was tricky. So we did a not-for-profit to help people do that. I was asked to do by the government to do work on school food. The repercussions, actually, that was back in 2013. And just today here in the UK, a whole new program of school food funding and regulation and training has just been announced based on that work. So things take time sometimes to happen. And then I was asked to do work on the government's food strategy here in the UK. How do we create a food system that not only creates enough calories, but makes us healthy instead of sick and restores the environment, rebuilds nature? And after that ended. I left government in 2023, and I was kind of trying to work out how to use. I'd seen the food system from so many different angles, and I was trying to work out what to do with that. And then I met Omar Habal, who you've had on your podcast before his cancer journey that I know he told you about. And he was just such an inspiration to me. And we talked about setting up Bramble Partners, which we have now set up, which is a business it's a for-profit business because the kind of change in the food system, which I'm sure we'll talk about, are massively going to change how and where you can make money in it. And that's going to lead to innovators being able to make money. So we have a fund that invests in innovative food businesses, and we advise the bigger companies on how to tackle the food system transition. And on that latter thing, it's all about health now. So everyone is, having been a kind of social and governance thing, health, oh, we mustn't make people sick, we mustn't sell them crisps. They're now like, holy moly, these appetite suppressing drugs are going to wipe out our businesses. How can we end up on the right side of that transition? So I spend all of my time basically talking to scientists, talking to businesses, talking to farmers, talking to government about what's going on in the food system. And, someone once asked me if why I hadn't become a politician. And I was like, because I want to know about stuff before I talk about it. And I know a lot about a very narrow field, which is the food system. But I feel like, there's a great satisfaction to being hit by new bits of information, and you know exactly where in your framework to put them. And I'm loving what I'm doing now.
Sounds exciting. Actually, to think about change in the UK government is in the governmental system and food system in the UK, then how required it was for you. I'd love to kind of dive a little, double click on that a bit, because governmental change is one of the things that we see as a force multiplier in healthcare and prevention. I think it's even, just like you're saying, a force multiplier in food. And, but it's really challenging and really slow, right? And now you have the big buzz of the US. Obviously, we talk internationally here because of both Bill being in Ireland and having a different food, growing his own food mostly on his own farm, right? And in my situation, we don't grow our own food, right? In the US, our food system's terrible. And then, you take the UK. I'd love to see what progress you thought was made and kind of how that all worked together. And now that you're out of the private sector, what that in the rearview mirror looks like and what we could do differently. I think we all can learn from that. We also argue all the time and debate about the NHS, and we debate about, why prevention matters, right? And that's, and how the healthcare payer system's broken. So those are all relevant topics here. And, love your experience. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So, I think the first thing you say when you're looking at a system is, I believe in incentives and I believe in feedback loops. And you've got to work out what the feedback loops are that are going wrong, that are creating bad outcomes, or going right, that are creating good ones. And in the food system, it's just really obvious, which is we have an appetite that basically, to boil it right down, really loves the stuff that makes us sick. And over time, food companies have spotted that, not because they want to kill us, but because they've noticed that if they market Pringles, you literally, once you pop, you can't stop. We will eat more of the stuff. Our satiety signals kick in later, and it messes up, if it's calorie dense, if it's hyperpalatable. And that's where all their marketing money goes, and they've made more money and we've got sick. It's not because they're bad people, that's just the incentive. And on the nature side, it's basically, we nature, our economy exists within nature. It relies on nature to give it all of the inputs that it requires to create capital growth. And yet we give that nature away for free. We don't cost it. It's not in our wallets. It's not in the balance sheet of companies. It's not, government doesn't measure it. It's not in GDP measurements. In fact, we subsidize, we pay negative money for nature. We pay people with subsidies to fishing companies, to farmers, to fossil fuel companies to destroy nature. So that's the first thing. You have these two feedback loops. I called them in the food strategy, the junk food cycle and the invisibility of nature, and they are going wrong. And unless you fix those, you're not going to fix anything. Then the question is, what is the government's role in that? Well, on health, one of the best politicians that I ever worked with said to me once, said, Henry, I really can do only four things. I can stop people doing things. I can say, I'll send you to jail if you do this. I can force people to do things. I'll say, I'll send you to jail if you won't do this. I can pay people. I can pay people for doing things, or I can tax them or fine them. That's it. I've got four levers that I can use. And then they said, well, I've got to feel I can make speeches as well, but I find that doesn't tend to work very well. And I'll come on to that in the American context. It's interesting. So on the health side, a lot of our measures were about how you reduce those commercial incentives for companies to continue to make food that makes us sick. And it's really tough. You have to restrict advertising. You have to tax salt and sugar. You have to basically make it less attractive to sell those foods. And you're working against a kind of one of the most powerful, or the amygdala evolved, which is what guides our hunger, evolved before we separated from lugworms, which are if you're in the UK, there's a lot of mud and the lugworms live in the mud. this is a really primal driver. So kind of taxing and regulating against it is very tough. What's interesting is now what's going on health is people say, well, hold on, it's really difficult to change the commercial incentives of companies. Why don't we change the evolved appetite? And that is what's going on. The other side of the feedback loop with appetite suppressing drugs is being changed. And that's fascinating on that side. On the nature side, we have changed our whole farming policy here in the UK. We now pay farmers not for producing food. We don't pay them subsidies. We pay them for producing public goods. We pay them for restoring nature. We pay them for stopping floods. And that is a complete transition. So that is how I see government intervention. And what I think is interesting about the time we're in now is, as I said, government intervention is less required than it once was because of the drugs on the we still need to actually help people eat more positive stuff rather than restricting the bad. And on the farming stuff, climate change and lack of food has really, and also the geopolitics, for example, what's going on around, the increase in the cost of fertilizer, has made people think, Christ, maybe we actually also need to change our farming model. So almost we're in a decade of disruption now where the slowness of government action has almost been overtaken by events in the world. And I'd say one last thing on what's going on in the States, because the NGO...
A lot of speeches.
Yeah, but it's really interesting. So
There's a lot of speeches and tweets
yeah,
is what's going on.
So the NGO community in the kind of the health community in the States, like really confused by RFK because they're like, wow, he's against ultra-processed food, and yeah, he's for positive food, but he's against vaccines. But what I think is quite interesting is he has done very little. Like he hasn't. I think he's banned maybe 1 or 2 additives. But funnily enough, the way that he is making speeches, coupled with the kind of what came before him on ultra processed food and Carlos Monteiro and Chris Van Tulleken, is actually, I was speaking to the politician who said that speeches weren't very effective, and I was like, well, what do you think about what's going on in the States? And he was like, maybe I wasn't making them right, for better or for worse. But we're seeing, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the US and how the whole food movement and the Maha movement plays out. But, it's a good example of how tribes, how uncomfortable it makes people feel to see someone who isn't in their tribe do things that they support. It makes people feel very strange.
For sure.
I have a quick question as a follow-up. GLP-1s and carnivore diets and organic food diets are expensive, and the majority of the people in the world really can't afford that. Fortunately, the very poorest of the poor that I work with in startup economies around the world have good access to organic food because they're literally growing forests, at least in my WeForest villages. How do you reconcile cheap food and lack of access to healthcare with these trends that you just described?
Yeah, so it's such a great question. And one of the measures in the food strategy that we recommended was that you need to supplement the diets of people who are living in poverty, and there are various ways of doing that, making fruit and veg cheaper, free school meals, etc. But I think what's interesting about the drug, a couple of things on the drugs. First of all, in the UK, if you look at the postcodes by affluence, so like the most affluent postcode to the least affluent postcode, the people who are paying for the drugs is about the same percentage in both. So, and they're about, in the UK, they're cheaper than America, but they're about, most people are kind of using them in a slightly odd way. But like, if you use them full time, it's about £2,000 a year. That's the same as keeping a pet. It's the same as smoking. So people are, and if you look at the data from the supermarkets, people are stopping spending money on all sorts of things because they just want not to be fat. So that's the first thing, is that like even people who are living in poverty, not the kind of poverty that you're talking about, but poverty in Western countries, are trying to buy these drugs. The second thing is the prices are going to crash. So if you look, for example, not the Wegovy pill, but orforglipron, which is the Eli Lilly pill, is a small molecule pill. So that is going to cost pence to make when it becomes generic. And we've seen already in Canada, the jabs come off the patent. In India, the jabs come off the patent. When the pills become generic, it's going to be this drug will be like statins or hay fever pills. Like you'll get given it when you're slightly spreading at 40, and it'll be like your aspirin a day. But the question then is, what we're seeing is, although on a population level people are eating better. And we don't know why it is they're eating better when they have the drugs. We don't know if it's because it changed their taste buds. We don't know if it's because when you're full, like the thing you eat is donuts and you're full quicker, so you don't eat the bad stuff. We don't know if it's because you're injecting yourself and therefore you're obviously paying a bit more attention because you're prepared to inject yourself. But actually on an individual level, there are a lot of people who are taking the drug and are not changing what they eat and are just eating less. That is causing obviously huge problems of malnutrition. We already had hidden hunger. We already had a problem of obese people who were massively malnourished. And so this is kind of back to what I think that the government's job now is actually, it needs to stop thinking about stopping people eat things and thinking about how it promotes the positive. How do you get people eating more fruit and veg? How do you get people eating more fiber in the right forms, not just adding inulin to things because it's cheap, but actually fiber in a food matrix. And I think that's what we're going to see over the whole, both commercial and state focus on diet is going to shift away from being, oh my God, I want to stop people selling children chocolate sweets that look like breakfast cereal, and how can I get people to eat more vegetables, eat more micronutrients, sort out their microbiome? And I think that commercially, there'll be kind of three things that will lead to that. So you've got the drugs, one thing. You've got AI, the focus groups that we're doing now at the moment compared to what I did on the food strategy back in 2020. Everyone is using AI as a nutrition coach. People's levels of knowledge about nutrition are just way beyond what they were in 2020. And then increasingly very expensive at the moment, but that will get cheaper as well. You'll get home diagnostics. And so you'll get this loop, I think, and the whole focus will be how do we help people eat better? And I just want to say one final thing on prevention, because here in the NHS, here in the UK and the NHS, we talk about prevention a lot. And this government, Health Secretary is a very good politician called Wes Streeting. He talks about prevention a lot. Most of the time, and in fact, this government, when they talk about prevention, they're not talking about prevention at all. They're talking about early diagnosis and treatment. So early diagnosis and treatment is really important, but it is very different from prevention. Prevention, is the whole thing about your podcast. Prevention is about diet, exercise, sleep, stress. It's and also community and social connection. So that is what prevention is about. And I think that hopefully we'll kind of drift gradually from where we are now, which is medicating people, radically literally cutting bits of their stomach out through early diagnosis and early treatment, to creating a better society. And if you think that sounds kind of utopic, I often, when I go to schools and talk at schools, which I occasionally do, I kind of scandalize the pupils by telling them all the places you used to be able to smoke when I was young. I was like, we could smoke on the aeroplane, we could smoke on the metro. You could literally, there was a tube on the London Underground, the smoking carriage. And when it arrived at every station, it would open up and this huge gale of smoke would waft out of it. And so I do think there is a chance, people say, the genie's out of the bottle, the food system is just unfixable. I'm not sure that's true. If you change the incentives, you can fix things.
Changing the incentives. Go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
A quick follow-up question. Oh, and just a comment. You missed out one of the golden prevention things, which is basic hygiene.
Yes.
Which is a massive preventer.
My wife would say that's because I'm not very good at tidying the house. She would laugh. She would say, I told you so. If she watches this, she's going to laugh a lot at that.
Well, falling is a major cause of aged, early death and early incapacitation. And so there is a strong argument for keeping the floor tidy of things that you might trip on, if we're going to look at all-cause prevention. That said, I think there are other preventatives coming. I've mentioned on the pod a few times, like Clarity, which is a drug that actually removes 7-ketocholesterol from your arteries and your plaques and your immune cells, and that's actually going to reverse heart disease, unlike statins, which just slow it down.
Yeah. Stick it all in place.
Yeah, just completely, like in Cyclarity's case, you literally pee out your plaques.
Yeah, exactly. I'm saying rather than just statins sticking them to the walls of your vessels.
Sticking it away. There is a bunch of craziness in the supplement world claiming to do just about everything and anything. How do you in these days, especially you mentioned people going to AI, how do you filter out the just enormous amount of disinformation that's being put into the air in order to sell stuff that really does nothing, or in the case of many supplements, actually is harmful?
So it's such a good question. And inulin, by the way, is one of them. So I've been spending a lot of time talking to the Quadram Institute, which is a microbiome institute in this country, and they're looking at like fiber in food matrix versus in other forms. And inulin, when it's added, can be harmful to certain people. So it's even things that like do good in some people can do harm in other people.
Absolutely.
So I actually think one of the most interesting things that's happened for me is the closing of Sora, OpenAI's video engine. Because for me, what it said to me is that first of all, we need people to pay for stuff, and we're not going to get enough money. I'm actually known at work as the AI video slop baron because I love making AI video slop. But the amount of money must have cost them making rubbish. But what it said to me is, I think there's a realization that the advertising model cannot work on these large language models because their whole premise is that they are truth. And you saw what happened with Anthropic, making those ads and how angry Sam Altman was. And so I am actually, and if you look at what they're doing in this dire area at the moment, all of the model makers are going out to the providers of nutritional information. They're all trying to get really good data into them and to create their own version of the truth. And I think that is, if you look at kind of where we've come from, it's the opposite of that, right? It's TikTok, Instagram, clicks, etc. So I actually think that, and this may be me being utopic, and you might tell me, come on, Henry, you're smoking something, but I actually think that incentive for AI companies is going to be hard to break by snake oil salesmen. And that in the end, it will mean, yes, you might get there will always be people selling snake oil and they'll get a 6-month hit and then they'll crash and there'll be businesses. There are people who make businesses like that all the time, that they've just gone from making one rubbish thing to another rubbish thing. But I do think that the pressure from AI, particularly the LLMs, but also actually on the biology side, as AI mathematical models begin to understand biology in a way that they currently do physics and a bit chemistry, I think that actually the truth will out. I think that is the way, funnily enough, that this is going. And again, I may be wrong, but I just like look at a system, look at incentives, and that for me seems to be the incentive of these AI models.
And if I take that premise as true, I'm not sure I do, and I will for the argument, for the sake of the exercise. How far behind is publicly available information and policy? How far behind is that from the science and where we actually are? Because like an influence can have a thing there. Like, the food pyramid was clearly influenced by Kellogg's and the people who sell grain to put the majority of your diet be that, and also, of course, economics. How far behind is the state of the art versus where the research is pointing us?
Well, let me give you an example. So we have a thing called the nutrient profile model here in the UK, and it's used to decide if you can advertise your products to children before PM, etc. And there's just been a big hullabaloo, big fuss about this. They've just introduced a new nutrient profile model that was first put together in 2018, so 8 years ago, and they're still discussing whether or not that should come into place. And even if it did come into place, it was only ever about what's the worst stuff. It was never about positive nutrition. It contains nothing about what we're going to see, which is, as obesity lifts, the gut-brain immune system axis and the microbiome becoming much more important. So government is always going to be like decades behind, at least a decade behind.
Agree.
Yep.
And so again, and I think, you may be right, I may be wrong. You are going to have it's going to be companies who are going to define what good nutrition is, because if they don't do it, either their competitors do it or the government, they're working to a government model that's years behind. I don't think they've realized this yet. So the retailers are still trying to say, well, we need to go with the government, but that's not going to work. You've got Kroger in the States, who's I think the first supermarket that I know of in the Western world who's actually put a health rating on some of their food. It's very basic, but yeah,
Really basic.
really
It's
basic.
really, they still gas their bananas too. Come on.
Yeah,
Like, I
but
mean, I mean, anything the food sellers in the US are doing are really,
yeah,
they're still putting the Lay's potato chips at the front of the aisle. They're still doing all the same
yeah.
things. And I always talk about the medical latency gap, and Bill's talking about the convergence, right? We're talking about food is medicine, and we're talking about medicine is also a contributor to how you eat and food, right? And the
Yeah,
convergence of all of that is very, very relevant, right? And it's
yeah,
relevant in prevention, it's relevant in diagnostics, it's relevant in all areas, because if you don't have the diagnostics of your microbiome to actually get you the information to say, well, you shouldn't eat gluten, or you shouldn't eat this, or you shouldn't eat that, whatever. And then you actually listen to it, you distill it down, it doesn't happen. And the food sellers have the misaligned incentives in the US, they have the misaligned incentives in the whole world.
yeah,
And so do the drug pushers. And I don't mean it in a bad way. Like, doctors are trying to do the best they can, right, with what the tools and knowledge base they have. But I often talk about the medical latency gap. And that is 17 years from the time that a product is invented, like Bill's talking about. And we can't have that anymore. It's 17 years to the time that it becomes the standard of care. GLP-1s have accelerated past that. Although, if you know when they were invented, Bill, when was
yeah.
you
43 years ago, the first person
yeah,
started taking. So yeah,
so it's total BS, right? Like, it's
44, I think
totally
now. Yeah,
BS. So now
Yeah.
we're talking about like transformation over generations, not in one generation. And it's with AI and interpretation, all this stuff. Like, Bill's right. Cutting the noise is 80% of the battle we have, because that's why we even started the podcast in the first place. So anyway, I sorry to interrupt, but it gets me fired up if you can't
no.
tell.
I think it's great, and I just think that what will the noise will be cut. I happen to think that even my team here I think are wrong about how many people are going to be on these drugs. I think it's going to. I
I
just
think
think
everybody. I think
yeah.
everybody's gonna be on it.
If you
Yeah.
look at what people have done to themselves over time to be thin, like they've done horrendous things. The desire to be thin is huge. So everyone's going to be on the drugs, and then the question is who owns like the truth on nutrition. And I think that will be companies. I just think that it's never going to be
Yeah.
the government, because they move too slowly. They always move too slowly. The incentives are not, they can't be at the cutting edge. And I remember my business partner, John Vincent in Leon, like way when we started Leon back in 2004. And he was talking about, really basic stuff like, glycemic load and microbiome and stuff. And like literally mainstream science was laughing at him, like literally, like he was a crank because he was talking about this stuff. And now that's kind of accepted. It is going to, the drugs are going to change what we eat. So the science is going to be defined by companies. And either you have the negative interpretation, which may be the right way, which is that they find any way they can to limbic capitalism, to use our urges to buy stuff that doesn't work, or some combination of AI making good science more widely available means that we eat better. And I think both futures are possible, and probably both futures will happen simultaneously.
Speaking of good science making us eat better, as I understand it, if you create a processed food that actually has a reasonably well-constructed food matrix, it is possible to make a healthy processed food. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there are different versions of the process. But if, for example, you take a stupid example, you take a dish of meatballs, right? And you pasteurize them and you put them in a tin. It's hard to see, we might find out later that there were some microbes that somehow survived the pasteurizing or broke down in a different way over time and therefore interacted differently. But, I think that we know it's pretty clear what the ways in which ultra processed food can you right. you eat just a weird, like the mix, that the nutrition is just weird because it's all made out of refined sugar, salt, refined carbs, and refined oil. So it just doesn't bear any relation to normal food. There are xenobiotics in it. So there are ingredients in it that come from the packaging or the processing or whatever that aren't normally in your diet. The micronutrients have been destroyed by the processing, in some way. There are a certain number of mechanisms, or it's been created explicitly to be hyperpalatable so that you overeat it. It's calorie dense and has low water. So there are explicit mechanisms, but we've been processing food for millions of years. The processing itself, any form of processing, is obviously nonsense, that it causes trouble. It's interesting, again, at the Quadram Institute, they have a whole bunch of frozen microbiomes from thousands and thousands of people, and they're systematically using those to test like what it is in certain foods that cause trouble and don't cause trouble. That's where that inulin data that I gave you came from before. But I think that we're at a stage now where some of this science is going to be revealed by big data, and we're going to. Fun enough, I was Demis Hassibis of DeepMind talks about when AI will crack biology and those complicated ecosystems of biology. I used to think it was probably a few years, but now, I was talking to some guys, like, what's the biggest biome studied by far database in the world? The gut of cows, right? Because that's where the money is. And they're just, at the moment, we're just miles from having the data on complex biological systems for AI. I think it's going to happen, but it might be more like 10 years plus than what I'd hoped, which was 5 years or so.
I mean, AI is making some amazing advancements in biology. I recently saw one of the Japanese universities have produced a gel that is something like 100 times stickier than superglue underwater. And it's all based on the proteins that mollusks make.
Yeah.
So there's huge advancements there. I do wonder whether we are going to find ourselves so individualized that we're going to need very individualized nutrition to get reasonably healthy.
Yeah,
Also, Sorry, go ahead.
90% of the planet, 99% of the planet is eating a diet that is so far away at a macro level from health giving.
Macros, exactly.
I'm sort of like, let's, at a personal level, I really want to, I want to live those extra 5 years in good health to see my grandchildren. At a societal level, we're just like miles away from needing personal. It's like bloody obvious what we need to do. We need to eat about 50% more fiber, 30% more fruit and veg, and eat a hell of a lot less processed food high in salt, sugar, and fat. So there is definitely a personal fine-tuning, but at a macro level, a societal level, we're living in a swamp. We're living in a food swamp, and we need to use your beloved leader's words, we need to drain the swamp before we do anything else.
I do think we also need a bit more protein than we're currently eating.
Depending on what age you are, depending on age and growth, not everyone. And then and there are iron for pubescent girls. There are definitely areas, protein in older people. There are definitely areas where protein in people who are losing weight on GLP-1s. There are areas where personalization is required, but I think it's been overdone at a societal level. Like, we know what to do. If you were to, like, during the Second World War, right, we had rationing. We increased that rationing and increased the amount of veg that people ate, because we needed to feed everyone from the UK. So what happened was everyone ate more veg, because in the old days, the rich used to eat all the meat. We had to reduce the amount of meat in total we produced, but poor people ate more protein. They didn't used to have it. And that was the healthiest, to this day, the healthiest our population has ever been is during the Second World War, because they were eating a macro level, a diet of fruit and veg cut from scratch with the right amount of protein. So at a societal level, I think there's some big stuff we need to do before we need personalization to solve our problems.
Yep,
It's fair. I'll comment in a fun conversation, because it's overlooked a lot. Bill's right. Trying to get an 82-year-old to eat more protein is really hard, and I have an 8-year-old mother who needs to hear that, right? Like, eat more protein, but there's also iron and other challenges. Funny enough, I mentioned Italy earlier, and after 2 weeks in Italy, eating whatever I wanted, the fact is that I actually processed the food in a better way, lost weight in the 2 weeks, And you look at the Italian, and I'm just going to use Italy as an example. We go to any country, we go to Japan, we go to, you could pick it. It's the life expectancy is longer than what you have in the UK and what we have in the US, right? And like you look at the elderly population, the average age of the elderly, and now they're literally living till 85 in Italy,
Yeah.
and the only major thing is food processing and where they get their food
Yeah.
that you can really point to, right? Like, and
Yeah.
yes, the community, and you can talk about blue zones and all the other things, right?
I would also say healthcare.
And well, yeah, their healthcare is free, but it's not, anyway, there's other problems. They don't know where to put their elderly. So we're talking about a lot of that. Just be mindful of time here. We only have like 10 minutes, and I want to make sure that we bring this back to a couple things. One, when it comes to, we always talk about, we have the scientists that listen to this, and they love to get into, well, where is the science going? I think there's a huge proponent of the group that needs that. There's also the basics, and the people who go, what should we do to cut through the noise as an individual that's going to the grocery store and preparing my food and like getting through the garbage? What are and this kind of gets to what Mel was talking about, the rapid fire questions, but what are the maybe three things that we can do as individuals besides get off the couch, eat more X, Y, and Z? What is it from your perspective, Henry, that really is meaningful, that would help the lay people to say, how do I eat better? Right? It's
Yeah.
just that simple.
The best thing that I have done, I have 3 children, 18, 16, and 14. We have never had breakfast cereal in our house.
Yeah.
And I have cooked them breakfast,
You're a chef.
porridge, cooked breakfast
Yes.
every morning. I get up at 6:15. I love it. It's a ritual. But I think not having breakfast cereals starts the day. It's like, when did pudding become breakfast? And so I think there are certain things about the environment in your house. And for breakfast cereal, we also don't have many of the other things. We don't have much processed food around. So that is the first thing. Yeah, get quick cooking, actually. It's like, be quick at cooking. So that's the first thing I would do for your children. And yeah, they'll go to friends' houses and they'll eat breakfast cereal. It'll become a joke that they're not allowed it, but it completely changes their palate for life. And then the other thing I'd say is, when we're all around, we religiously eat together, sitting at a table together. And I think that is that evening, that breakfast, and then the evening meal that I spend with my children for social reasons, for health reasons, just for pleasure reasons. Those are the two things that I would do. I do all sorts of things that I wouldn't recommend that other people do, but we maybe
Don't
won't
we
go
all?
into here. But
We all do that.
But I would. Those are the two things that I think, cooking your family a dinner from scratch, eating it together, and banning any form of processed food at breakfast.
Very, very much agree. Todd, you've got some rapid fires?
I do. And it's a good, kind of brings me back to one thing on investing in food. Like, some people invest in food, right? Like that, and you do. What, and these are not exactly scripted, these rapid fire questions, but for the investors out there, should they sell the certain categories of food industry short, right? Like, where are we going? And everybody talks about the effects of GLP-1 and the medicine and how that comes to it. But in your perspective, Henry, what should we be, where should we be putting our capital in food, right? Like, is it the things that are that early, or, should we be running from, like alcohol?
Well,
I know I don't drink as much as I used to. Right, like, and that's what we used to do. We'd get home and we'd have a drink.
You
right?
showed us your Whoop earlier on. I tell you what,
I'm all wired. I've got all these wearables.
once you've got one of those, they are so harsh. When you have, like, Tad and Noah had like 2 glasses of wine, and they're telling you like you're exhausted.
Oh, so they know. They know.
So
they know when you do peptides too. Actually, it's pretty amazing. It's great data. It shows you.
I think there are two things at the big capital end of the spectrum. It's all about timing. So if you look at privately owned businesses, they are a lot of them are selling off the bits of their business that are not going to be valuable in 30 years' time, because that's family-owned business. That's the kind of period. So we will definitely be eating fewer sweets, less salty snacks, etc., etc. But I'm out.
Oh, you're getting out of the building.
That's the That's
The food industry has
that's
heard
the
our podcast already.
that's the warning that I was about to
Ringing the
give.
bell, warning, danger, Will Robinson.
I was
Yeah.
about to give stock and share advice. But it's all about timing there, right? And that's why the big companies are having problems, because you can make a lot of money selling that stuff in the short term. And I don't know, for your stock and share portfolio, that's a timing issue.
Of course.
I think the mistake that people make at the venture level. So we invest at a growth kind of Series A growth. So because we're kind of experts and we have networks, we like businesses we can add value to. But I think that the mistake that people made in food investing 1.0, if you like, is that they bet on how they wanted the world to be and also trends. And so there was a lot of money put into alternative protein. There was a lot of money put into vertical farming. There was a lot of money put into black soldier fly businesses as alternative protein. And as venture investors, we kind of look at the system and we think about where the profit will move. And then we almost try and forget that and be opportunistic, because in the end, it's individual founders who find niches in the system where the profit's going to grow. So rather than chasing, we know that there are going to be various huge macro shifts, but you've got to be quite careful in chasing those. Actually, what you've got to do is look at a lot of individual entrepreneurs and you'll say, okay, yes, that fits with the macro shift, and if it goes a particular way, there might be an even bigger upside. And there's a business that Bill knows that we're looking at, and who has that. There's like a if they do what they say they're going to do now, there's a good return. But if they hit into this other thing, it could be massive. But then all the old stuff. Does the particular business model work? Is there a moat? Is it a good investor? So I think that we use the word opportunistic all the time. Let's just forget about everything and look at each individual business on its own merits.
We do the same at Seed. We focus on adding value to the companies we invest in, and I think that's the thing. If as somebody that was a chef and grew a fast food organization, the opposite side, right? Like, so how to catalyze the change, and that's good to hear. So just to be quick about it, and we'll go a few minutes over. Is there anything out there that is widely accepted that you strongly disagree with? What that people accept, like the food pyramid was something people accepted for generations. So what is it today for you?
For me, my big concern is fiber. I think we're gonna see, we're gonna think that talking about you need more fiber was a bit like saying, a broken leg, a cancer in your leg, or something else were just all bad leg. But fiber is going to turn out to be much more complex than we can even begin, and we will have done quite a lot of harm by adding very refined fibers to things. That's one thing I believe.
I don't disagree. That affects your microbiome significantly, right? So to me, that's where you go back to root cause. GLP-1s were discovered in our microbiome, right? Like saying, it's all related. Awesome answer there. And we always ask, and this is how you got on. We had Omar on, your partner, which was a fun conversation with his cancer journey and food and all the things that went into that. The one person we should have on this podcast next.
Well, if you haven't had him already, I would go for Lord Bethel. Have you had him?
No. That would be the first Lord we had on the show.
There you go. I think he's just renouncing his peerage, actually, but you can ask him about that. But anyway, he was a health minister during COVID. And every morning they did ward rounds, like virtually. So they'd go around the wards with one of the doctors in one of the hospitals in the UK. And he was just struck by how bad the metabolic shape was of all the people who were dying from COVID. And it set him on a really proper prevention crusade, which has become his whole life's work. But starting with that, in his youth, he used to run nightclubs. And so that's quite an interesting journey to get to where he is now. So I would say James Bethel, also just a fantastic, fantastic guy.
Yeah, we'd love to connect with him. So that sounds great. And I wish we could stay on for longer, and we may have to have you back as things evolve. But Bill, anything to close with? I'm going to close the show, but before we wrap up, we just want to make sure we get everybody.
No, I just want to say that Leon was an absolutely fantastic idea. That I think after you sold it, lost its way a tiny bit.
Well, John is going to bring it back from the if anyone can, he can. So come in 6 months time, go and try it again, and it'll be amazing.
Yeah, because I was a huge fan when it first came out, and then I watched it change path, and so I'm so glad to hear
it wasn't great. It wasn't great. Yeah.
And I think that having a science background and then moving into cooking is just a really interesting perspective. So props to you for your journey. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been really really thank you.
Totally agree. Thanks, Bill. And Henry, thanks for being on. For the listeners, this is relevant. The conversation of how food interacts with health and wellness and prevention and catching disease early is something we talk about very, very consistently. But how to invest in the downstream direction around food and how we get there earlier and earlier and earlier is really key. Long before you get into the healthcare system, you should be thinking about what you put in your body, the process of medications and what that does and all of that. And for anyone listening who wants to learn more about your work, Henry, who and how do they reach out to you? We'll put it in the show notes as well.
If you're interested in the work we do, bramble.partners is our website. We'd love to hear from you if you're an entrepreneur or a company that's needing help. If you want to learn about, like, I tried to write up the food strategy for our 16-year who was our 18-year-old son who was now 16 with my wife, and actually I'm using it as a prop for my phone. So I'll have it here, which is
nice.
Ravenous, and that is basically a description of the food system and why it went wrong and what we can do to fix it, but written for it. It should be fun, entertaining. It's written for a 16-year-old child, but also with kind of all the details in there too. So if you're fancying, I think it's still on Amazon. It was a bestseller back in 2023 when we published it. But if you want some background reading, it's a fun read.
We'll check it out. Really appreciate it. And for everyone else, thanks for joining us on Killer Cure. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone thinking about the future of health and prevention so that they can actually, shop in the grocery store more efficiently and eat better and get to that early prevention. Appreciate it. And Henry, again, thank you for being on.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks so much, Henry.